friends and professionals that I've either admired or have worked with through the years. So let me just begin. I'm going to introduce Meredith. We have Meredith, Desmond, and Fidel. And let me begin by introducing Meredith. Meredith grew up in Page in Prescott, Arizona. She's a proud member of the Navajo tribe. Meredith has 3 children, has resided in Provo for 14 years. She has a bachelor's degree from BYU in English and 2 minors in history and American Indian Studies. Meredith currently serves as the coordinator for American Indian Alaska Native Education for the Provo City School District and director for American Indian Education as This Is the Place Heritage Park. As the American Indian Education Coordinator, Meredith is in charge of overseeing the education and cultural preservation of over 200 American Indian and Alaska Native students in the Provo area, K through 12. Meredith and her family are happy to reside in Provo. She loves working at the school district, and who wouldn't, right? Provo School District, because it allows her to serve and highlight and project the voices of her Provo Native American youth. And then we'll jump to Desmond. Desmond Lomax is a clinical mental health therapist who worked in the field of law enforcement and corrections for over 20 years. He retired from the Utah Department of Corrections, where he worked as the community program director in early 2020 and joined the Arbiter Institute as a senior consultant. Arbiter helps individuals, teams, and organizations move from the default self-focus of an inward mindset to the result focus of an outward mindset. At the Utah Department of Corrections, Desmond worked to expand treatment resources for those on probation and parole through the state of Utah. He has a passion for helping others and was led by this passion to the field of therapy and corrections. He thoroughly enjoyed facilitating outward mindset workshops within the Utah Department of Corrections and saw the benefits that outward mindset brought to the department and the community it serves. Desmond is an adjunct professor for the University of Utah in the field of forensic social work. He is a past president of the Utah Mental Health Counseling Association. He has a wife of 22 years who is a 2-time cancer survivor. Desmond, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And then, of course, Fidel Montero, our high school principal. Dr. Montero currently serves as principal of Titview High School in Provo, Utah. He also taught my children back in middle school. Prior to his current experience, he served as chief of staff at Utah Valley University and principal of Alta High School. He is an author, presenter, and continues to lead school improvement efforts through various engagements with K-12 and higher education. Dr. Montero's areas of emphasis include comprehensive school reform, systems development, quantitative analysis. He has worked in educational settings that include New York, Los Angeles, Miami, and throughout the state of Utah. Dr. Montero is a first-generation high school graduate and immigrant to the United States. He is a proud alumnus of Columbia University Teachers College, where he completed his doctoral and master's degree, and Brigham Young University, where he completed his undergraduate studies. He's the father of 4 witty children and is married to his best friend, thought partner, and life. Wow, what a great team. Thank you for being here. So we are spread out a little bit because of COVID-19, and we're recognizing that 6 feet apart. So we're going to ask everybody to speak a little louder so that you can hear. And we're going to start, we have 4 questions outlined for the panel. And the first question, we're going to begin with you, Meredith. How do you encourage diversity in your school and your workplace? What are the things that you do working with the Native Americans in Alaska? Please.
I'm not sure if this is loud enough. Let me know if this is not loud enough. I'm told I have a pretty soft voice. My kids would say otherwise. It's good to be with you today. So I'm going to start off just by introducing myself in the Diné way, which is Navajo. Meredith Lamb, I come from the Great Navajo Nation. I was actually just there yesterday. Took a group of people, and what we were able to do was give some much needed school supplies and sanitation equipment to really hard hit areas of the reservation yesterday. So it's good to be with you today. And I just wanted to let you know that as far as the way that we introduce ourselves in Navajo, we always introduce by saying hello, and then we give our plans, which is our mother's plan because we are a matriarchal society. But all Native American tribes are matriarchal. And then maternal would be my second clan, which is my father's. If I'm telling you where I'm from, I would tell you that I'm from where my mother is from, and she is from Pueblo Pintado, New Mexico. So I would say I'm from Pueblo Pintado, New Mexico. But although I did grow up in Border Town Reservation and on reservation, father was Christian, and so I was able to grow up in very diverse communities as far as living and experiencing my Native American culture, my Navajo people. It's a beautiful way of growing up. And then I'll get to the later part, which is where I think I kind of landed into the profession that I'm in, is the dichotomy, of where my life has led me from moving from a very highly populated Native American community to being the only Native American in my entire high school, which was in Prescott. So there was a dichotomy there, but it did make me appreciate, the diversity, and it actually helped me become more of an ambassador, an educator at an early age, just because there were people that I had to talk to about my culture, because I was probably the first Native American that they'd ever met. Going to the questions, I don't want to take too much time, guys, sorry. How do I encourage diversity in where I am in school or in the workplace? I think introductions are very important for American Indian people, and as I'm here today, I just want to make sure that everybody is clear that there are 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States, Navajo being one of them. So I cannot speak for all 574 nations. We are all different. We have different languages, different aspects of our culture. We live in different regions of the United States. So by any means am I speaking for everybody. I am just solely speaking from my experience and what I have come across in my work, my professional life. So as far as diversity, being an American Indian, I think that this is something that has always been very prevalent in my life. Knowing that I am different, I think that became very apparent as I started to, transition from a reservation town into a border town, which was moving from Tuba City to Page. To me, diversity is understanding that each person comes from a unique background, whether that is the differences that make us who we are, whether that is race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, our physical abilities. I think it is really knowing those differences, but I'm going to be using an active verb very frequently throughout this, and it's the verb to cultivate. I think that embracing and cultivating those differences are such a big portion and such a big focus of diversity, especially when it comes to Native American students that I work with and the Native communities that I work with. I think it's important, and I try to encourage my students to celebrate those differences, those things that make them unique. I think that it's important, part of being different is really sharing our story and sharing our narrative. And I think that's going to be later as we talk about inclusion. I really have felt very blessed to be in the area that I work, because I feel like with my Native students, it's important for them to see people who look like them or who come from a similar background, and somebody who can help them find that voice, because we all have voices, and I believe that once we're able to share those voices with one another and learn more about these differences that we come, because not one person is the same. We are all very different, but to celebrate those differences, I think is a very important aspect of
I love that concept of cultivating and really focusing. Thank you. Desmond, please.
Meredith took all the good answers. You know, my name is Desmond Lomax, and I appreciate the introductions, and I'm grateful to just be surrounded by amazing people of different cultural backgrounds. How do we encourage diversity? I'll tell you a little bit about my background. I had a son that passed away in November to suicide, and he never felt really included or inclusive in school and high school and graduating to going to college, and looking at that loss in my life and the life of my family, I wanted to be a part of some positive change, right? To be a part of something where people can be inclusive and so when I think of diversity, I think of the process of including people in a way where they feel welcome. There's so many different things that are diverse. I'm African American, and I was amazed because I do videos on Facebook for my son. It's called Illuminating Unity, and I did one on diversity. And I was amazed at how many people thought that being African American meant I listened to hip hop music, that my pants were saggy, and that I spoke a certain way. Like there were like 3 or 4 major components that make someone African American, and that's like, oh, that's just the way it is, right? And so Desmond, you're different because you speak, you kind of articulate. Your pants aren't saggy; they are tight. I'm older, so it's just the way it is. And you have a background in education, and so how you're different than all the other African American people. And I was like, no, like you're confusing diversity with prescribed set things that you see in society that are encouraged through music and video and social media, but that doesn't make all of a person's culture. And so when I look at encouraging diversity, it's that pursuit of understanding who people are beyond what they look like and celebrating that. And in encouraging that, it's this process of maybe looking around and saying, like I never realized that I am around people that look and behave just like me. And so who are the people maybe in my school that don't look and behave just like me? And have I taken this process, have I taken this time to reach out to those people and make them feel welcome? I believe that if every Hope Squad member, every high school or junior high or elementary school student can look around and see and celebrate differences and bring them into the fold, that we will have better societal outcomes, not just from schools, but as society as a whole. If I'm now educating kids to see diversity as an opportunity to reach out and learn from someone else, if that's what diversity is, then we will grow as society as a whole.
Desmond, I love that. Thank you. I love the concept of celebrating our uniqueness and our differences, right? No, please.
Well, good morning. Good morning, everybody who are joining us from different parts of this great country that we live in and from other places. Thank you, Greg, for creating this space, and thank you, Meredith and Desmond, for sharing it. I feel very privileged to be here and honored. So a few thoughts that I had as we started the conversation this morning. All of us have different environments that we've experienced from when we were young. I appreciate Mary's introduction because I think that gives us some connection points right away, and then some ideas that we can really look at it and value. The fact that she spoke about her mother and the influence of women and her upbringing, I think that's really powerful. That many of us that are watching can relate to and say, "Wow, that's something that I didn't realize about Meredith. That all of a sudden I have a connection point." And so when I think of diversity, I think of what makes us think differently, what makes us think independently, that makes us uniquely who we are. And in some ways, Greg, if you look at the founding of this country, it was founded on this idea of wanting to be different, wanting to be diverse, not wanting to be held under tyranny. And the way that this country was constructed was sort of under that premise. Now, we still have a lot of work to do as a nation, and in some ways, I think we're creating more divisions today than perhaps we we have in the past. And yet that this idea that each person brings certain value, certain worth because of our difference is, to me, the richness of diversity. You asked, how do we encourage it in our workplace and in our schools? I would say that you have to make it part of your DNA. You have to embrace it as one of the most important attributes of your organization, and not just speak about it, but actually live it. When you look at funding initiatives in a school, do they promote the values of diversity and inclusion? And if they don't, then perhaps you need to reconsider. For us as a school, what we have told our community is that we're going to help children be college, career, and life ready. And that's what we do as a school. And what we tell people, we're going to help you do that by embracing the ideas of growth, excellence, and inclusion. So inclusion drives everything that we do as an organization. So again, I keep coming back to funding, because if you're not allocating resources to put forth that mission, then I think you're only sort of, you're speaking about it theoretically, but not necessarily at a pragmatic level.
No, thank you. I love that inclusion, but also looking at resources, right? And sometimes those resources are manpower, sometimes they're financial, other things that way. And I do believe it's so critical to always have that mindset at the very beginning before you even start the program, start the process. All right, we're going to go on to question number 2, which is, why is it important to teach about culture? And then can you share some examples of how you teach that? How do you, in your position, set that example? We're going to start with Desmond this time. Desmond, you're up.
Oh. Well, it's interesting because I think in a lot of circumstances we only know parts of different cultures. Like we only get like snippets of like maybe what's been exposed to us. And so first thing I want to do is help people understand that they have a culture. Like I think there's some people who are so comfortable in their culture that they're blind to it. Like they exist in a culture. Like there is a culture for white Americans. You just are so engrossed in it, so involved in it, that you don't even think it's a thing. But it very much, so everyone has culture. So the first thing I want to do is take a little time to describe your culture. Like what are the things you were raised to believe, the things you come to understand. And so everyone has culture. And I think sometimes there's people like, well, I don't think I have a culture. You're indigenous, so you have a culture. Yeah, clearly you're Latin, so you must have some type of culture, but we don't see it within ourselves. So the first thing is to see the culture we have within ourselves, and how we see the world, and how that has been brought up in some form of culture, and what we're comfortable with. And then once we understand we all have a culture, then we explore each other's culture with curiosity, not to objectify someone, but to see someone as a person. Okay. And so like one of my examples earlier is like, now that I understand that Desmond may have an African American culture, I want to be very curious about it, so I can see him more as a person. Once we are able to see and discover people's culture and see them more as a person, we're more likely to respond in loving, caring, empathetic ways. What we lack currently is the study and practice of empathy. True empathy. I see a person as a person in such a way that the way I engage them, the way I treat them, is solely based upon the love I have for them as the person that I see them as. And by discovering who they are and discovering their culture, it only increases my love and my compassion for them as a friend. And I think that is what we need to do. Like we all have culture. We all can love our cultures. Not all culture is good, right? And so in a process of this conversation, maybe there's some things you've learned about my culture have been very negative. But we can discuss that and understand that, that's a part of it. But there's these other robust parts that we can come to understand. And as we see each other as people, then we're more likely to have more meaningful relationships.
Just some examples of what you do, Desmond. What, within your work as a parent, what are some of the things that you do?
So what I do is I love to One example is educating people about the fact that African American culture is one of overcoming challenges. A lot of people don't understand that. Sometimes, like, I think people are so afraid that, like, oh, like, okay, is Desmond going to bring up slavery? Like, ooh, I had nothing to do with that. Or, ooh, that's such an ugly history. Or, I don't want to be aware of that. But the reality is it's a culture of overcoming such things, right? Whether it's slavery, whether it's Jim Crow laws, whether it's discrimination, whether it's not being able to vote because of different challenges. We've overcome all of those things to get to a point now in society where we can contribute. I think that's a part of culture, learning to overcome challenges. Another part of culture is a lot of people understand is like a lot of times money is much different. Like, my views on money are much different than people that are not of my culture. Like, my views are, I have a little house that I can pay for, and if I have to work at Walmart, I can still pay for my house. Like, that's like, you know, like, culturally, I like a semblance of I have what I need, and everything else is meant for me to share. That's how I was raised. I was raised from there. And so a lot of people, like, don't know, you know, because there's such a feel of assimilation in our society that to be rich or famous or to be successful, it looks a certain way, but it doesn't look that way for people in other cultures. And so I share those examples, and not to be offensive to anyone, because that's not the goal, but to open people's mind to the fact that maybe success looks different to Desmond than it does for me, and that's okay. We're going to engage our life and what we see as success differently based upon how we were raised and brought up.
You know, I love that, Desmond, because it really is having the opportunity to discover that culture. And for me, I like to take it to the next level, is discovering and experiencing it, because that's what you were saying, right? I'm a Caucasian redneck from the Midwest. You know, my father, my grandfather, my great grandfathers, they were all farmers, and so, you know, I could eat sweet corn for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And it's interesting with those cultures, that difference. But I love your concept of not only understanding your own, because sometimes that is a discovery, but then taking it to the next level and discovering others.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Really good. Thank you. Fidel, you're up.
So why is it important to teach culture? I would first rephrase that question and ask why is it important to embrace it, and again, to make it part of who we are as, you know, whatever setting we're working in. I'll answer this question by sharing a quick story. So I'm currently working on a book where I'm sort of reflecting about the inheritance that my father left me, because he would always joke that he wasn't going to leave me any inheritance. So the title of the book is Herencia, which in Spanish means inheritance. And it's sort of a reflection of all the lessons that my father and my mother gave me as immigrants to this country that make me who I am today. And I sort of dive into the ideas of responsibility, work, pride in family, and so forth. And we can have a long conversation about that. However, the sort of one of the realizations that I'm having is that when I was 14 years old, I didn't view these assets I didn't value them. In fact, I was embarrassed by them. When I was young, I would go to school, and what was privileged in my school wasn't necessarily who I was. It was, as Desmond was saying, a certain narrative, and the people who I saw in power didn't look like, didn't look like me. They didn't look like my father. And again, when they talked about success, they didn't talk about success in terms of the culture, the environment that I was being brought up in. So I mentioned those things because it's important, right, to embrace diversity, to embrace culture, because it flattens the power structure that we have in our organizations and in society. It tells young people that, hey, at this table, we're all the same, we're all equal, and we all add the same value that we are bringing to the table. And all of a sudden, it creates a safe place where we can learn from each other, where we can sort of, start to work towards potential that a lot of times I think is capped for certain children in our schools. So it's vitally important that we just don't embrace it, but that again, that culture and diversity becomes part of our DNA, so that again, we flatten the power structure. So an example of that, there was, I'm thinking of an experience. I told you that in our school, we've embraced the idea of inclusion as part of our mission, right? And that's it's who we want to be defined as, or how we want to be defined as a place that privileges inclusion. And I'm thinking of a child who 3 years ago, when they were in their 9th grade year, had to leave our school because as an LGBTQ child, they didn't feel a sense of place. They didn't feel a sense of connection. And it was sad to see this particular student leave. Fortunately, towards the end of the year, that their freshman year, they came back, and we were so thrilled that they were coming back. And I still remember that their first day back in school. I remember sitting in the hallway, and they walked past me, this person, and they bumped into some other students, and they sort of embraced. And as those students walked past me, right, the ones that were, embracing that person, they were like, "Oh, we're so glad this student is back." And I thought to myself, that is really cool, right? That's sort of your mission in action, right? Well, fast forward one more year, and again, I'm in the hallway. This is just a few weeks ago, and I bump into the student again, right, who's now going into their junior year, and they were wearing one of our mentoring shirts, right? And they had become part of a mentoring group that we have at our school that welcomes our freshmen. And I'm telling you, talk about seeing your mission sort of happen before you, and seeing it sort of promoted by this young person who really struggled when they first got to our school, and through examples, through conversations, through advocacy on her parents' side, we've been able to support them, and now in turn they're paying it back, right? So to me, that's an example of how when you flatten the power structures in your organization, you can really see some cool things happen.
I love that, embracing the culture and actually acting upon it, right? It's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to really act on it. What a perfect example of that young lady who was finally accepted by their peers.
Yeah.
Okay, Meredith, you're up.
Well, this is actually very personal, because at some point in my career, and upbringing, I definitely hit a moment where I knew that I was visible, but simultaneously invisible to others. Visible because of the stereotypes I think that people have of American Indian people, whether that's the messages that we learn from Hollywood, very romanticized versions of what Americans are, or Native Americans are, who we are. And going back to, this is a very common question for me that people, when I come in contact with, especially when I worked in Washington, D.C., people would say, okay, well, what do I call you? Do I call you Native American? What's the term? Personally, I feel like Native American is very contemporary. I do prefer American Indian because that is who we are. And I believe that American Indian is, it's a legal status, in the United States. I think that's something that people don't realize. And this is going to go into the whole invisible portion. Having been very immersed in history and English in my college career, this is definitely something that was very apparent being at BYU, being one of a very small percentage of student body. Native Americans were less than 1%. But this whole idea of being simultaneously visible and invisible, visible with the negative connotations, I think, or ideas that people have about American Indians. And unfortunately, that is why we educate. Unfortunately, we've had these stereotypes for many years, whether that is, just unfair history that we learn. I feel that that goes a lot to the curriculum. Right now, there's a movement to decolonize, to indigenize stories of the American Indian people, because very much we see the history told through what we call a colonial perspective, or a victor perspective, is I really am heavily a supporter of us telling our own stories. I feel that there is power and strength that comes with telling your own narrative. Um, One thing that I loved that I heard, because I know that this month is Suicide Prevention Month, um, is I had heard from the Center, and I'll refer to them quite often, Center for Native American Youth. They are a great organization, but there's a letter that they wrote out to the Native American youth of the United States, and they basically said, just realize and recognize that whatever the history tells you, your most powerful medicine is to know that you carry within you intergenerational strength, and there's power there. And I think that goes along with what Desmond was saying as far as resiliency. So my job as an educator, my job in administration is really to help others see that intergenerational strength, because there's a beauty that comes from our history. And rather than run from it and be ashamed of it, I feel like it's something that we can be more open and have more dialogue about, because that is going to help move from being, this negative visible to being positive. Invisible because people don't necessarily see. I'm not dressed, if I'm not in my regalia or my traditional wear, people would probably assume that I'm another ethnicity or I'm another culture. And it's really not until people get to know me that they figure out, like, oh, so tell me a little bit more about that. What is that about? And I do love this when I'm talking to my students, my families, is I let them know that, my goal in this job is not for myself, it's obviously for you, and for you to recognize your strength, for you to recognize your history, and for you to recognize that you come from a very, very amazing background. And that's something that you're going to hold on to for the rest of your life. That's something that's going to be an integral part of who you are. And I really believe that, when I tell my students, I said, my expectation for you, and I can tell you this, that the expectation at school is not for you to walk through those school doors and shed your cultural skin. That is not the goal. The goal is to cultivate, to embrace that. That is where your power, that is where your strength comes from. And that is why your ancestors, suffered, is so that you could be here. And there really is such powerful medicine recognizing the proper narrative.
Well, I look at our three guests today, and I'm amazed at not only your talent, but your background. When you really think about it, what your father sacrificed, right, Fidel, and you're the first graduate, college graduate, et cetera. Desmond, you talk about slavery and all the other things, and how you have to work through that and not accept it, but to learn from it and to see what you can do to change, make it better. And then, of course, Meredith, what the American Indian. I've been on a lot of reservations, and I've been in Alaska a lot working with schools, and, Indians are proud, and they should be proud, right? I mean, they're the land, when you look at what we have out there right now, it's amazing. So thank you for having the courage to share those personal insights and stories that all of us can learn from. So we're going to jump into number 3. The question number 3 is, what are some of the new approaches? I mean, COVID has really kind of pushed us off a cliff for a little while right now, and I know we're recovering a little bit, but it's changed everything, the way that we do and the way that we interact or have the ability to interact. But Fidel, we're going to start with you. What are some of the things that we can do, that we can share to give ideas to, address diversity and create that inclusion?
Yeah. Well, so thanks for this question, Greg. In terms of the way COVID has forced our hand in some ways, I think, first of all, COVID has made us all vulnerable as a society. And COVID doesn't discriminate based on gender, based on race, based on socioeconomics. And I think because of that, everybody has felt a little bit vulnerable and a little bit scared. And, what it has also reminded us of, though, is I think for us as a school system, it has really forced the conversation about privilege and who has access to good health care, who has access to resources, who has access to technology. And if there's been sort of a silver lining during this pandemic, it has been that as a system, we have really asked hard questions about ourselves and how we're doing to support our most vulnerable children. Because although the disease doesn't discriminate, the way that people sort of deal with it, the way that your privilege allows you to sort of cope with it is different. And you know, you see children whose families are having to work during the pandemic, and they're the most sort of at risk, and children who don't have, you know, a parent that can stay, you know, in school with them during these shutdowns. And that sort of becomes real for us as a system. So I think COVID, again, has really forced us to ask the question, what are we doing here, folks? What are we doing as a school? And what do we have in place in a school that sort of that is amplifying those discrepancies, that's amplifying, you know, that those differences in our community. And if we have, you know, systems in place that we need to remove so that we can create a more balanced playing field, then I think it at least it's making us have that conversation. I think some good things that have come out of it at a very pragmatic level for us as a school. We have really, you know, pushed to have one-to-one initiatives that we were missing. We have really pushed to have, you know, internet access, you know, in the homes of our children. We still have work to do, but you know, we're doing that. It has really forced us to ask hard questions about, look, are we really communicating, and do we have two-way channels of communication with our most vulnerable, you know, constituents? So I think those are all things that are happening. You mentioned about the current climate in the U.S. I think, unfortunately, you know, politics is at a really sort of toxic level right now, and that sort of toxic energy has spilled over into conversations of healthcare. So I think our children are sort of confused, I think, in a lot of ways when they hear different messages. But I think, you know, if there's one thing that our hundreds of students that are listening today, that they can hopefully take away, is that they are in the driver's seat, and as they go into adulthood, they are the ones that are going to determine what our sort of political culture looks like as we're moving forward, and how we deal with these different challenges that we're sort of, you know, trying to deal with, and in some ways we're fumbling, you know, right now.
I really believe that the world right now, what we've created is social distancing is really creating social isolation.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what color you are, it doesn't matter income or anything that way. And you're seeing a lot of people that are being affected by it. So, Meredith, tell us your thoughts.
My thoughts on this are, you know, it's so interesting because COVID has really, I mean, never in our life have we ever dealt with any of, you know, I've heard of pandemics, you know, that is basically what wiped out the American Indians, you know, diseases when, you know, Europeans moved in and settled, but to live and to actually live during a time, and Corona actually really has devastated the nation.
You were there yesterday.
I was just there yesterday, and I mean, people don't know that the infection rate per capita is 3 times that of New York City. So there are so many people that are being affected by this. And you just think of the physical, and so many people. I've had 4 relatives pass away from Corona, and not being able to attend funerals. It's been really difficult, you know, and I feel like it has had an impact, and it's definitely something that I have to sit down and talk to my own children about, and just let them know, like, hey, I mean, this, you know, when I'm raising my kids or talking to my students, normally I can relate to them, and I can say, oh yeah, I've been through that. Yeah, this was a time that I remember where it was similar. But with this, we're all going through this together, and I don't think any of us are in that moment where we can just say, oh yeah, I've been through this before. I mean, this is treading new ground for all of us, and I think that for me, the most important thing for me is to be patient, and for my students right now, and just for Native American students out there, if you're listening, I always tell my kids, you have a superpower. Your superpower is that intergenerational strength. And there's stories, there's strength in your narrative. There's so much that you can do and to share that superpower with other people. And that's something I think that's positive. And one way that I actually, I'm almost embarrassed that I bring this up, but I think that one way of sharing those stories is you look at these social platforms, that our students are involved in. That's where they are. I mean, unfortunately, yes, we are all very secluded right now, and we're in our homes, we're, in quarantine or whatever we maybe are self-isolation. But students right now are really finding their narrative and finding and sharing humor and positivity through TikTok, or Facebook. And that's something that I feel, for me, that's been positive. It's this whole new way of sharing your story, and maybe it's 30 seconds, but it's a way that people have been able to be positive with it. We're not, even though we may have not gone through this before, this is something that we can all work together. And I think it's a great way to implement diversity that way. It's got to be that constant reminder of those shared narratives and those strengths that we each have. And when we focus on that, I feel like we'll be better able to tackle, anything that comes our way.
I love that, and I love that superpower, right? That we have within ourselves. Those first 3 or 4 months when I was really isolated. I remember one time I went on YouTube and I downloaded Dick Van Dyke from Mary Poppins, whatever it was, but I love to laugh. And there's just a little piece in there where her uncle or relative floats up to the sky and he starts to laugh. Well, you watch people, when they get to that part, everybody just starts to laugh because it's such a healthy laugh and it's funny. So I copied that and went down through my list of people and I sent it out to about 50 of my friends. And I said, I'm having one of those days. And it was so fun because they sent back another one that was funny to them or whatever. But I think that sharing, reaching out and sharing those thoughts and ideas and that positivity is so crucial. Desmond, your thoughts?
There was a joke where COVID had a 26-3 lead at halftime, and then racial injustice won the game. It's just, so COVID's one thing, right? And then some of the racial injustice is a whole nother challenge. And I think a new approach to implementing diversity and inclusion is there was a time where, okay, there's a problem, so let's implement some diversity and inclusion training. And that'll solve the problem. Starbucks, we'll just have a half a day. We'll train everyone on diversity and inclusion. That'll solve the problem. How about a new approach? How about an approach where diversity and inclusion is just something that we do every day because it's super healthy and super okay and super fun. And once we realize that we have our own cultures to celebrate, and I think one of the things is we have an invisible culture in America. People aren't very self-aware of their culture, so that when we start talking about inclusion and diversity, people get offended. It becomes, so now I just need to learn about American Indians and Latinos and that's all, and African Americans. That's all I need to learn now. That's diversity and inclusion. Because we don't include and help people discover their own cultural backgrounds, then it just becomes a lesson on brown people. Okay, let me understand the different shades of brown, and nobody wants to do that. So why not have an approach where we can understand all different variations of culture, what people understand, have them recognize they even have their own culture, and then we share it and we celebrate it. Now, if I am American Indian and someone calls me and says, hey, we want you to share your culture, can you come dance for us? Hey, you're African American, do you have some cool rap songs that you have for us? Okay, we also have to recognize that as much as we want to be inclusive, we want to be inclusive to the whole culture, not just the part that we get excited about. And so sometimes there's a slippery slope where we want to bring in diversity, but when we bring in diversity, we show up. I've got American Indians dancing. I got, Africans dancing. Maybe it's sponsored by Popeyes. I don't know. But the reality is that it's all about what we're eating and how we're dancing, and not enough about who we truly are. So one of the new approaches is let's get beyond the dancing, get beyond the rap music, get beyond some of those things, and I think it'll start helping young folk really start to dig deep about what is my culture. If I'm a white person in Utah, what is my culture? If I'm a brown person in New York, what is my culture? Because right now, we're not having those discussions, and all we see as culture is maybe dancing or rapping or music or things like that. And I think we need to get a much deeper dive in that we are more diverse than we would believe. But we also, it'll help recognize, like he was talking about what he learned from his father. I'm like, yep, check, check, check. Some of the same things that he experienced that my father taught me. And it's just, so as we start to realize that we have different cultures, we also recognize and we connect with humanity. Similar messages. We also have similar messages between our cultures that we can connect to. Well,
I love that. One of the questions that's come in from the followers is, how do we help teens who feel their voice doesn't count because they aren't diverse? But the reality is, we really are,
yes.
right? I mean, it doesn't matter what color, where we're from, or whatever. And I love what you're saying to better understand what is my culture. My culture, farmland, whatever. Raised my children on a farm. We had animals and different things that way. Much different than others, but I'm no different because I've experienced those. Because Fidel, you've experienced yours with yours, and you're growing up with reservation and experience that being visible and invisible. The thing that I think scares me the most is we're seeing so much anger out there, and you're seeing anger across the board. I mean, really. And a colleague of mine once said that anger really covers three emotions: fear, hurt, and disappointment. And that's what you're seeing. People are feeling disappointed. They're feeling hurt. They're feeling left out, or whatever it is. So let's wrap up with this last question, because I think we have about 10 minutes left. Ace has given me the sign. 10 minutes left. We're in the fourth quarter right now, and once again, I just want to thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to spend some time with us talking to Hope Squad advisors, students, and others. But the last question I want to ask is, I'm going to jump down to number 6, just because I think it's comprehensive enough. But what strategies have you used to respond to diversity challenges personally? What have you used to respond to those? And Meredith, I'm going to jump back to you to kind of lead that for us.
I think that for me, I'm never going to stop stressing narrative. I think that that's always really important, that we share that with others. I think that when it comes to diversity, and I'm just going to kind of relate this to Hope Squad, is I remember giving a presentation, I think at Centennial Middle School, and we had talked about the medicine wheel and the importance of the medicine wheel in American Indian culture and how that is for healing, because it's very holistic. And I think that that's something different. It's a different way of thinking. And I think that this is a great form of diversity. I think it's just to teach something to somebody where they never thought that they would ever learn that. And that's probably one of the things I live for, is to see people's eyes light up and to have this moment of disenchantment where they're like, I did not know that. That's amazing. And so having this whole, training with this whole squad, it was really neat to see that these students were being taught something that they necessarily weren't thinking about, as far as the sacred movement and as far as how, the healing and the medicine wheel, and how the idea of that is very much of a holistic way of taking care of ourselves. And I feel like society could really benefit from this as well. Western society, Western thought is very linear. As far as Native Americans, we think very cyclical. We move in phases. And so this idea of the medicine wheel and healing, I think, is really important, and something that I love to teach, is that it's not just important to take care of the one thing and you check that off your list and then you work on the next thing. It's about being very holistic in everything, not just in healing, but in life, and how you embrace your challenges. There's always a way that we can move in these wonderful circular fashion ways that we may not have thought about prior, but that are very beneficial, I think, as far as thinking outside of the box. So I love, these moments that I have with students, teachers, and professionals, and I'm doing professional development. It's really great because, I mean, if I start talking cultural pedagogy, everyone's like kind of, I don't want to talk about that. It goes more than that. So I really love being able to, I live for those moments where I'm able to learn from somebody, or that I'm able to teach something that they didn't know. And whether that is that, oh, did you actually know that American Indians have legal status? That is because it's our right to sovereignty and how our government works with another government, government. But did you also know that American Indians were, they were not U.S. citizens until 1924. And you had American Indians who fought wars and were very proud of that warrior spirit, very patriotic in the sense that they were going to defend their community. And I think that is such an inspiration for me when I come to, I wake up in the morning and I always remember my parents gave me a warrior name, which is a female warrior name, and my middle name is Hazba. And I remember growing up kind of like you, Fidel. I think I was embarrassed about it. It was something that I was like, people would ask, what's your middle name? And I'm like, Hazba. They're like, what? But, it means the female warrior going to war. And I really embrace that in my life. And I feel like rather than seeing, I always try to look at positive in life, and I try to see the positive. What can I get or grow from this experience, moving from the trial and crossing that bridge and pursue strength and resiliency? I just really try to share that with anybody that I do come in contact, let them know that, you're not alone, and that there's people here, and that we care. And I never want diversity to be something that just the light goes off when people come and, talk to me and find out that I'm American Indian. I'm very, very open to it, and you can ask me anything, honestly. I always tell people, this is a safe space. Like, you can ask me any question, and don't be embarrassed. No question is a dumb question. I'm happy to be here and talk about diversity.
Desmond, please.
Diversity is not a project, it's people. And so for all my Hope Squad peeps, first of all, I love you. Keep doing what you're doing. Second of all, there are people like my son who have passed away that don't need to pass away, and recognizing that you're an instrument to see people in their difficulties can give you so much more strength, interpersonal strength. And so in addressing diversity, it is just simply an additional thing that makes a person a person. And so your curiosity, your acceptance of that person and the whole person will make you a better Hope Squad member. This is not projects, these are people. And when you're more likely to see people as people, you'll be more effective.
Well, to wrap up, Greg, thank you for, again, hosting the conversation and again, Meredith, Desmond, and go over friends that are watching. In terms of a strategy, I don't know if there's a specific strategy, but I guess I'll share with y'all the advice that I got from one of my I had a lot of wonderful professors, but Dr. Tom Sobel stands out as one of the people who made me think most about this issue. And Tom was he was superintendent of New York State schools for a period of time, and we sat down with him and had conversations about how do we become moral, right? And he said you don't become moral by being moralistic. So in other words, you don't become an ethical person, a moral person by sitting back and judging, and by watching whatever news outlet gives you information. You don't become moral that way. He says you become moral through engagement. Through engaging in the messiness of life, engaging in conversations, engaging in sort of in the difficulty of life. And what I love about Hope Squad is that y'all have sort of stood up as Hope Squad leaders and have said, you know what, not everybody has it easy, and I'm going to be one of those people, one of those students who wants to engage in sort of some of the challenges that you have, and let me be a helping hand for you. And Twitter. I wish we had more engagement like this where we can understand each other. And although we may be different and we may view the world different, as we have talked about today, because of our different upbringing, at least we can find those common points of interest and say, you know what, how do we grow together? How do we become better as a people? Those conversations.
I love that. I want to thank you. This has been a great experience for me because I've learned a lot from listening to you, and it warms my heart. But as a high school principal, I used to take students down to Navajo reservation, and we would spend a week. We even got to spend a night in a hold on, and had such a spiritual experience. And you know, the one and done. You know, it really has to be about engagement and moving forward and understanding that it really isn't a project. I think I learned a great lesson one time as a very young principal that two people can be right at the same time. See, right now we want to separate. It's my way or the highway. You know, the challenge with that. And I think we have to get beyond that. We have to have the courage to reach out to anybody and everybody. So once again, thank you for taking time to be with us. We know how busy your lives are. I think those who have joined us, we want to thank you for taking your time. This is Hope Squad sponsored, focusing on diversity and things that we can do to make a difference in other lives. So thank you very much, and have a safe day. I hope that's the end.